Hello and welcome to another video by Rick Miracle. Me, in my series Freemasonry and Satanism. Again, it boggles my mind that I chose the correct name for this series of videos. The book I'm about to review, series number 172. Unbelievable piece of information I'm about to tell you. I've been reading this book for a few days, and I just was moving on inside the book about halfway through it, and I could not believe what I read. Talk about connecting the dots. Freemasonry and Satanism. Israel, created 1948 after hundreds of years of hot pursuit to get the Palestinians land, causing World War I, World War II. Then, of course, in 9/11, creating propaganda and an insane false flag, 911, so they could accelerate the problem, destroy cities, put phosphorus like molten lava, pouring it on the people, machine gunning the people. Insane. Bombing water facilities, sewer facilities. Insane. A lot of information out there in my videos over the years about the attempts to rebuild King Solomon's temple, which has a lot of occult witchcraft information connected to it. Then here in the United States, with the New Age, New World Order, and symbolisms everywhere for the false flags or terror events, bombings, satanic rituals, Emmys, Grammys, Super Bowl halftime shows, tunnel openings, the devil or a goat portrayed, videoed projection onto the Hoover Dam, the largest projection ever, and the goat is a symbol for the devil. Shiva on the Empire State Building. And then after the Supreme Court voted that day, and it was announced to the public that states could not ban gay marriage, that day, that evening, there were gigantic projections or ribbons or whatever, colors in the rainbow shapes on whole bridges in the White House and buildings everywhere. You don't put all that together in a day. It's all planned. So this Freemasonry and Satanism, and my review of research since 2005, and my making videos since 2013, September, October, I started doing that after I told myself, what good is all this knowledge if I don't share it? So here I am reading this book, and I'm saying, man, it's all verified. A journal of Israel's betrayal. Traitors and Carpetbaggers in the Promised Land. Right there, the Promised Land. Who promised the land to the Hebrews? Was it really God? Or was it some fallen angels or aliens? As crazy as it seems. Apparently this dark cloud followed the Hebrews from Egypt, and every night it landed and the occupants got out and went inside this tabernacle, some post with curtains around it, because they didn't want to be seen. Food was left outside. Kind of odd, huh? Barry Chamus, forward by Dr. N.W. Hutchings. Traitors and Carpetbaggers. You're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. Go find this book. Used bookstores, new book, I don't care. PDF. Listen to this. Page 60. I was reading along about all this espionage and betrayal. I'm going to read this stuff too. But I'm going to read the last first, and then when I finish reading the other stuff, maybe I'll read this last part again, twice. It's so unbelievable. June 1994 was the first time Inside Israel spoke about, remember the series is Freemasonry and Satanism. Albert Pike declared Lucifer was their deity. A lot of people say that the Hebrews, or even Jewish people, are descendants from some serpent beings in the Garden of Eden with the serpent. The dragon symbol and serpent snake symbol is everywhere in the occult. Monuments all over the world. June 1994 was the first time Israel spoke about Masonic manipulation of the peace process. Masonic manipulation of the peace process. In May, two newspapers, Shashi and Yodot Anarnot, published pieces documenting Rabin's ties to the secret society. This could not be ignored. And I have to show you this because there's more. So I got it in highlighted in italics there. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Jordanian King Hussein have more in common than they are both Middle Eastern leaders. King Hussein, of course, leader of Jordan, and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Prime Minister of Israel. So they have more in common than they're both leaders of Middle Eastern countries. Both are members of Freemasons. Hussein is open about his association with the Masons and has achieved a high degree of standing in the organization. He flies several times a year to attend Masonic functions in London. Remember, the series is Freemasonry and Satanism. Rabin is much more coy about his Masonic ties. A response from the Prime Minister's office on his ties to Masonry reads, Masonry. After Mr. Rabin completed his army career and just before becoming the ambassador to Washington, D.C., he was inducted into the Freemasons movement. That was 26 years ago, and since he has maintained no further ties to Masonry, according to this author. Rabin's denial is belied by a film of him presiding over a Masonic celebration in Jerusalem in 1976. So he lied. He was presiding. There's a film of him over a Masonic celebration in Jerusalem, the leader of Israel. Oh my, this puts a whole different twist on my research. I would never expect to find this kind of evidence. Jerusalem is uniquely important to Masons since they trace their origins to the Masons who built Solomon's Temple. My very first video in this series, Freemasonry and Satanism, was on the Freemasonic Bible. That would be Book Review 1. And there were all kinds of pictures of King Solomon's Temple and a long list of supplies needed to rebuild it. And so many of my other videos have all these King Solomon connections. Part of this prophecy about these people ruling the world. So one of these guys, King Hussein of Jordan, is a proud member, and the other coy about his membership. It is not known if Rabin and Hussein view the future of Jerusalem in shared Masonic terms. The story goes, the New World Order will be ruled from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. One will be the spiritual capital of the world, and the other one will be the financial capital of the world. It's part of the New World Order. You think I'm making all this stuff up? 600 hours of material on YouTube. I would have never dreamed of finding this book with this stuff in writing. By the spring of 1994, the editors of this book also began to realize that one of Yossi Berlin's duties, you're not going to believe what I'm going to say here after all the videos I've made, was to meld the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, into a world army. He approached the task with vigor, sending Israeli troops to troubled spots far from the Middle East. And remember, they even in the United States, they've been sending police chiefs and sheriff leaders and other people to Israel to get training on how to police us, like they police the Palestinian people and other peoples in the Middle East, killing them and enslaving them and robbing them of everything, their life, their wealth, their pride, everything. I can't believe this. Please go get this book. Says it right there, what I just read. Unbelievable. So now that I've read this portion at the page 60 and 61, I'm going to go back where I put a little tab here and connect some more dots, if you can believe that. Berlin's Vatican sellout. So one of the leaders, the deputy foreign minister, Yossi Berlin's Vatican sellout. So now we're including the Vatican, the Freemasons, the Jewish people. We know about Zionism. The Jews dispersed all over the world for a couple thousand years, the diaspora. Information from my previous videos, even from the Encyclopedia Judaica. There's no doubt about what I'm saying. Page 45. The price Israel paid for recent diplomatic recognition by the Vatican is another example of Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Berlin's self-serving program. The Vatican has not moved from its position of distrust of Israel or Jews. It must be recalled that since his investiture, the current Pope, John Paul II, has pursued a pro-Arab diplomatic policy which came to full blossom in the days preceding. Got to switch pages here. The days preceding, the Pope was an advocate supporting the Arabs. The day preceding the Persian Gulf War, when the Vatican evinced unseemly sympathy with the goals of Iraq President Saddam Hussein. During John Paul's tenure of nunnery, when he was in office, a nunnery was erected on the site of the Auschwitz death camp in his native Poland, creating a major rift in world Jewry. So a lot of this stuff they do is something to do with what they call the Hegelian dialectic. cause something to happen so other people will react. Or another term or way to look at it is to divide and conquer. And clearly it's part of deception. And if their deity is Lucifer, Satan, the devil's major tool in his tool bag is deception. Yes? No? And I'm aware a lot of people will start giggling or get angry and say there is no devil. A lot of people have been deceived. Go watch my videos. I've gone on a variety of topics. Psychic research, remote viewing, angels, demons, other types of beings, gray aliens, all this stuff I say is connected. And this book is connecting some horrible states of affairs to Israel, and it's talking about the involvement of leaders around the world. And clearly, as it just said here, they want to have a world army. And it's what the material I'm going to read in this video is just unbelievable. The Vatican made no attempts to establish any sort of dialogue with Israel until the Madrid Middle East Peace Conference in October 1991. At that point, the Holy See approved a permanent council to resolve differences with Israel. The motivation for the decision was mostly fear. The Vatican maintains a significant number of churches and institutions in the administered territories of Israel, of Palestine, in the area. For instance, its library inside the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem is invaluable. So the birthplace of Jesus, there is a church of the Nativity of Bethlehem that's invaluable. And some people still question whether Jesus was real or not. With the growing possibility of a change in the status quo, the Catholic Church in Rome did not want to be left out of negotiations affecting its property that the church owned. By July 1993, discussions had reached foreign minister level, but no breakthroughs were in sight. Israel's signing of the Declaration of Principles with the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, Palestine Liberation Army, in September 1993. So some of the Palestinian peoples were organizing, trying to create a Palestinian state. So changed the pace of the papal negotiations with Israel. So Israel was signing the Declaration of Principles with the PLO, and apparently the Catholic Church in Rome was concerned about its real estate, so it became a little more motivated in its negotiations. And you're not going to believe what the Catholic Church wants in Jerusalem. We just read that the IDF is intended to be part of a world army. And Zionism, the way I understand it, is ruling the world from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Like the Hunger Games movie, and the world's going to be divided all up into blocks. The people are going to be herded away from rural areas into mega cities. Oh my. Where they have all these intense microwave transmitters and chemicals dumped from the sky and toxins in the foods and spying cameras and all kinds of other mind control technologies. I'd say we are in trouble. Previously, the Vatican had assumed that its properties would remain under Israel control for an indefinite period. Suddenly, it was confronted with the prospects of its treasures, so the Vatican's treasures, falling into the hands of the PLO. And again, I think there's more control from the puppet masters. A lot of this is to get people to think certain things. But I'm convinced the leadership of the Vatican is in cahoots with the leadership of the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Zionist, the occult witchcraft organizations, New Age, New World Order, globalism, sustainability, biodiversity, global warming, global cooling, and if you don't like that, climate change. Pole shifting, Nibiru, Anunnaki aliens, gray aliens, tall Nordics, tall whites, oranges, orbs, angels, and so much more bizarre information out there. There was panic in the Holy See, Vatican, and in November, Berlin chose to exploit the opportunity and personally took over negotiations with the Vatican. He smelled a diplomatic coup that could only enhance his reputation and went to work. The Vatican had one objective, while Berlin had many. The Pope wanted the Church's properties protected and ordered his chief negotiator, Monsignor Claudio Chili, to arrange extraterritorial status for them in a way of keeping them from falling into the hands of the PLO in the future. The Palestinian people. It's their country. Well, it was until it was covertly stolen from them after World War II, when it was even attempted to take it from them after during World War I with the Balfour Agreement. Had to destroy the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, in Greece, to take control of the area. So what was World War I and World War II really about? How many people lost their wealth and their lives? All kinds of successes were taking place by these people pursuing global domination. And if you watched my previous video, Series 171, you know that there's a lot of deception in Masonry Illustrated back in 1905. They caused civil war in the United States, 1861 to 65. The northern jurisdiction of Freemasons was created, and the South was the southern jurisdiction of Freemasons, Scottish Rite, which apparently isn't Scottish, and they call it the ancient and accepted, and it's not ancient and it's not accepted. But I guess if we don't speak up, some kind of law exists that it becomes accepted. Berlin had several demands of his own. He wanted full diplomatic recognition, including an exchange of ambassadors. Among his other demands was that priceless Jewish historical books in the Vatican Library be transferred to Israel. So this Israeli leader really wants some of those books in the Vatican's library down there in the basement cellar. And so would the whole world like to get a look at that library. A lot of deception. Apparently down in the catacombs of the Vatican, there's even a big picture, you can go look this up online, of Lucifer. And so much other evidence. The Vatican's negotiator quickly detected how desperate Berlin was for some form of diplomatic recognition. In exchange for such an agreement, the Vatican wanted the right to build on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. So during these negotiations, where the Vatican wanted to protect its properties in Palestine and even in the Israeli territories, controlled territories, the Vatican wanted the right to build on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Wow. And to receive tax exemptions for this and all other church properties in Israel. Berlin agreed to the two demands, which were included in a separate secret accord. As for the treasury of Jewish literature, the best the Vatican would offer was open access to its archives. In return for giving in to the Vatican's wishes, the Pope signed a recognition accord with Israel, missing one vital clause, the exchange of ambassadors. After the accord was signed, the Foreign Ministry attempted to appoint Rabbi David Rosen as its ambassador to the Vatican, but the Holy See would not approve the move, purportedly because a rabbi was deemed inappropriate to the position. So a leading religious Jewish person would be inappropriate to deal with a leading religious organization in Rome? That sounds kind of strange. And of course they have to deal with the Jesuits or the Freemasons or the Illuminati, the financiers, the bankers, the controller, and many other secret society organizations. Bohemian Grove, Bilderberger Group, Club of Rome, Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, Rosicrucians, Kabbalist organizations, witchcraft organizations, and likely even the Church of Satan. Only got 600 plus hours on YouTube. It enables my brain to accept that's probably how it is. I wouldn't have believed it at 500 hours, 400 hours, 300 hours of video production that I've done, 200 hours, 100 hours, of course. Even of 10 years almost reading books, I wouldn't have believed it. But going on 14 years of research and my 5th year of making videos, I'm starting to believe it. The evidence is becoming clearer and clearer. Reading these pages is some very obvious details that people need to know. All the books I've been going over lately, it's like you have one of those OMG moments. I can't believe it. Not everyone at the Foreign Ministry approved of the manner in which Belen had sold Israel so cheaply. The ministry's legal affairs spokesman, Esther Smaglag, complained about the various capitulations and was subsequently transferred to the Israeli embassy in Kamuda, Nepal. Other foreign ministry employees, more discreet in their opposition to the Vatican agreement, have merely leaked details of it. M.K. Avraham Shapira was one recipient of the leaked information, and he publicly demanded to know if Israel has exempted the Vatican from property taxes and given away building permits on Mount Zion. Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Shamul Mir, went one step further. He claimed he had received information the properties promised to the Vatican in Jerusalem would be granted extraterritorial status. He also demanded that Belen publish the full text of the agreement. So extraterritorial status. And a lot of people are aware, and a lot of people are not aware. But anyways, Washington, D.C., the Vatican, and a portion, the financial section of London, are all part of one corporation and have extraterrestrial status. They're not part of the countries they're in. Washington, D.C. is not part of the United States. The Vatican is not part of Italy. The financial area in London is not part of Britain or London. Those three organizations are one huge corporation, a secret society, controlling and operating in the world. Look it up, don't believe me. The response from Belen's office is revealing. It does not deny the secret clauses, but rather admits, included in the Vatican agreement, is the issue of papal properties, the Pope's properties, the Vatican's properties, in Israel that will be resolved by a committee of experts that has already been formed. If such a committee is in existence, its work is not being publicized. What is gradually being revealed by perturbed aides and foreign ministry workers is the tale of an obsessed politician once again putting his own interest ahead of the country's. So I suggest, as I've suggested before, that these politicians come from secret societies, like George Bush coming from the Skull and Bones, or the other high-level Freemasonic organizations, or the Heritage Foundation, or the Council of Foreign Relations, or the Trilateral Committee, Bilderberger Groups, Bohemian Grove, and so much more. So they have an agenda, and apparently it has a spiritual connection to some kind of demonic beast or fallen angels, something to do with the spiritual world, involving the Kabbalah, the secret doctrine of Helena Blavatsky and her Lucifer magazine. You see how all this connects and connects and connects? Even Aleister Crowley, Series 23 in my Freemasonry and Satanism book review 23, talks about this stuff. Then I'm learning that Google owns YouTube. I think Google also owns Yahoo search and all people's emails, and they have all the Gmails, and probably Facebook. We're in trouble. Coming online with the 5G network, where everything will be electromagnetically connected, even in the microwave spectrum. And would you stick a little puppy dog or your baby in a microwave oven? I think not. Then why would we allow these towers with multiple transmitters on them? Actually, so many transmitters, it takes your breath away. If you drive down the street, look at those towers up there. Look around. It's not one or two or three or four transmitters and on the tops of tall buildings. And the cables leading up are big, thick cables with heavy duty capacity and wattage, amperage, transmitting power, microwaves. This is one crazy book. March 1994. In January, Barry Chamis, the author of this book, apparently it was a magazine investigating Israeli activities. It's called Inside Israel. So they would know. Barry Chamis answered his phone and received a remarkable offer. The caller insisted he had acquired highly classified documents secreted out of Yossi Belin's office in the foreign ministry, and that he was acting as an interlocutor for someone working inside the office in Israel. That someone was appalled by the cables, so somebody was reading Yossi Belin's mail. He had read from Oslo, and elsewhere, and had cautiously copied them. They were released to the Jerusalem Post and were used as a basis for a front page article exposing the government's real policy of pushing Israel back to the 1967 borders. Again, they play this game left and right, liberal, conservative, and different leaders, politicians, and things, when it really doesn't tell us what the real goals were and are. But they like to keep the battle going because, like the Hegelian dialectic, these things like 911 have intentional results at the end of the day. So anyways, this was one of the few times that a superficial Jerusalem Post, the major newspaper in Israel, and you can go online and see the jpost.com in English, and I encourage you to read some of the articles like you do in the press releases when you check your email on the computer, etc., and go down and read the comments. It will surprise you what the Jewish people will say in those comments about us, if you're non-Jewish, and other countries and leaders. I guess they don't think anybody's looking. So this is the superficial Jerusalem Post. This is the first time conducted a genuine investigation of the government conduct or any other sensitive subject. In retaliation, the foreign minister canceled 1,300 subscriptions, costing the paper over $40,000. So the leading newspaper in Israel actually published some nasty goings-on in Israel, secret things going on with the government officials, and they were punished by the government canceling 1,300 subscriptions, costing the paper $40,000. I suspect that's how it works all over the world. Why our news channels, TV channels, newspapers, magazines don't print the truth, because they'll be punished monetarily, ruined careers, and in many cases recently assassinated even. Look at President John Kennedy saying to the world that secret societies were repugnant to the American way of life, and he was going to expose it. And the Freemasonic organizations partly control the world with these other secret societies like the Illuminati, the Zionists, the high-level Vaticans, and so many others. So he was killed, President John Kennedy, on Delaney Plaza, which is a Masonic plaza, like the Twin Towers and the two columns in a Freemasonic lodge, Jacob and Bose, and the columns on King Solomon's temple, and the two Twin Towers are two tall columns. The witchcraft, occultic Kabbalah symbolism is everywhere. So anyways, back to the book. Chemes met with the interlocker, so somebody that was secretly shuttling the records out of there, in the lobby of a Jerusalem hotel, where he was handed a long computer printout. After a cursory glance, he realized he was holding explosive material. This, he was told, was the stuff the Post wouldn't print, the Jerusalem Post. Inside Israel, the author of this book's magazine, had established a name for courage and might be the only publication that would dare to make the documents public. Courageous, perhaps, but suicidal, no. Clemish called Steve Roden, the reporter who used the document as the basis for a now infamous Jerusalem Post story. He said, "The document checks out, and so does the author. We checked and rechecked both of them for 3 months and received confirmation of the facts right up to the cabinet level." The editorial board of the Stoogie Post, like I said, go read the jpost.com online, English edition, and find out why they call it Stoogie. They even have a whole section, an icon you can click, about Aliyah, all the Jews returning to that area, Middle East, Jerusalem, Israel, Palestine, land of Canaan, whatever you want to call it. For the last couple 100 years, I've shown many pictures and I've talked about it quite a bit. So after thousands of years of being dispersed all over the world, there is an intentional mass gathering of all the Jews all over the world to go back there. It's part of this prophecy. They can't destroy the rest of the world with all of their fellow Jews out there. Do you see it? You got to get everybody to come back in before you destroy the world. Who are these people? The editorial board of the Stoogie Post, out of fear for even worse government reprisals, like I said, President John Kennedy and many others assassinated, nixed the information that Inside Israel chose to publish. So even the Stoogie Post newspaper didn't want to publish what the Inside Israel magazine was going to publish and did publish. One claim was too much. You are not going to believe, again in this video, what I am about to say. One claim was too much, by far, for the editors of Inside Israel to take responsibility for. The document claimed that Belen's plan for emptying the territories of Jewish residents included instilling panic by having local settlers' leaders killed. So this Jewish leader was going to have some of the settlers, Jewish settlers, killed to create fear. He's probably going to blame it on the Palestinians. However, there was circumstantial evidence to back this seemingly preposterous assertion, and the editors chose to present it with the headline, "Are the Settlers Paranoid?" So in the documentation by these intelligent people, scurried out of the headquarters of the Israeli leadership, it was in that paperwork that they were going to have some of the Israeli Palestinian settlers killed to install fear. Think about that with the terrorist shootings and bombings in America and so much more, and trying to disarm us. You're not going to believe what I'm going to read next. Of all the material the editors gathered, this was the most frightening for the country and for themselves personally. So they're using these same tactics in Europe, in the United States, and all over the world. Like I said, we're being deceived on a regular basis. There is an agenda. It's a new age, new world order, globalism, one world religion, one world currency. And who is the deity, the God of these people? According to biblical prophecy, it's some kind of antichrist, demonic being. And if you don't swear allegiance to him, the preferred method of execution is beheading. And if you go look up on YouTube, apparently the U.S. government purchased 30,000 brand spanking new shiny guillotines. Millions and billions of bullets, built FEMA camps. One might think that we humans are under attack by some demonic beings. Moving on here, the hidden clauses of Oslo. One senior foreign minister official has documented the Israel PLO negotiations, and through a second party has permitted them to be leaked to the Israeli media. So they leak stuff intentionally. It's like all this bizarre stuff in the news now where so many people are coming out of the closet and say 30 years ago, 20 years ago, this politician, this movie star molested me, raped me, all this stuff. There's an intentional outcome meant. They know what they're doing. They're into mind control. The shocking indictment of Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Berlin could be dismissed unless some factors are taken into account. The official was a member of Berlin's peace team and was privy to the most highly classified foreign ministry documents. As a ranking diplomat aide, he was first-hand witness to the origins and development of the secret Oslo negotiations, the PISGA, P-I-S-G-A. The foreign ministry program for Israel's future is outlined in the document authored by Berlin himself called the Palestine Interim Self-Government Agreement, the PISGA. Remember, this is 1993, 94, and so these pursuits of certain goals have continued on. And of course, 7 years later was 2001. 7 plus 1994 equals 2001, which was accelerating the program for a greater Israel to have more land and more property and more power for this global order. When first prepared, the document was classified by the foreign minister as a proposal submitted by the joint Jordanian-Palestine delegation to the Washington talks. So what they do is they just drag this stuff out, drag it 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 out. And they have stuff on the headlines of the newspapers, and they get presidents who say he's going to bring about change like Obama. They keep appeasing people, putting it off, putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. But slowly they're gaining more power and more power and more power. And the rest of us are in a more dangerous situation. Slowly taking us somewhere. They publish movies like Hunger Games. They're telling us where they're planning on taking us. The Pisca has been incorporated into other local media reports about deception in the peace process. Like I said, it's all deception. The main points are the ultimate aims of the peace process are to roll back Israel's territory to the 1949 borders. So I suspect this kind of secrets coming out were making a lot of other Jewish Israeli people angry. So it was creating a battle in Israel, fighting to not give up the land that they had taken over. So it looks like it's a gigantic foreclosure proceedings going on all over the Middle East, because apparently there was an Israel empire thousands of years ago. Fulfillment of prophecy. And nobody wants to believe it. And I wouldn't believe some of this stuff if I weren't reading it in a book. I've got so many books more to go over. I was astonished I found this information. If I'd have known this was in this book, I would have talked about this book earlier. But I can only do one book at a time. To create a Palestinian entity which, after an interim period, will be granted statehood to accede this state exclusive rights to underground water resources geologically shared by both state, and to permit the right of return to any Palestinian to the new nation. So part of the agreement is the Israel would let the Palestinians have the water that was under their territories, and Israel very much wanted that water, and that they would allow Palestinians to come back there. But again, this is 1994, and the deception continues. The Pisca reportedly describes a plan to disarm settlers. The Pisca agreement purportedly describes a plan to disarm settlers, Jewish settlers, and force them to evacuate the West Bank and Gaza Strip, after which no Jews will be permitted inside the areas. Parts of this plan may have already been put into force. And some other notes here. Illegitimacy. Berlin is said to have personally authorized another policy paper titled The Illegitimacy of Israel's Sovereignty over Jerusalem. It outlines the government's program for the future of Jerusalem by calling for the division of the old city, Jerusalem, into cantons with border posts. So they want to divide the city into several sections, which will be under the United Nations control. And we know that the Illuminati, Zionist, Jewish elite people, and the other secret societies controls the United Nations. Israel will be barred from freely entering East Jerusalem, while access to West Jerusalem will be severely restricted for Arabs. In effect, Jerusalem will once again become a divided city. All right, continuing on with this very interesting story. A Journal of Israel's Betrayal, Traitors and Carpetbaggers in the Promised Land, Barry Kamish. So this paragraph starts out with Israel started the Six-Day War. One of Belin's greatest worries was that a future Likud government would short-circuit his plan for a Palestinian state during the interim period by resettling the remaining lands outside Jericho and the Gaza Strip. Like I said before, they pretend they're going to do different things, but I don't believe they have any intentions of creating a Palestinian state. Quite the contrary, and this was 1994, where they were posturing, pretending to be doing one thing, but meanwhile, as we'll read here, they were using delaying tactics. And eventually 9/11 happened, and that led to all the other Arab countries being overthrown and destroyed, millions of people killed, even depleted uranium shells launched all over Iraq, and who knows where else. Biological weapons, incendiary weapons, phosphorus, burning phosphorus like a match head on fire, rained from the sky. Helicopters with machine guns, rockets, destroying water supplies, sewer systems, all the industries. To counter such a possibility, the program calls for Israel to pass a law declaring itself the aggressor in the Six-Day War. And how many people think that's going to happen? They're going to pass a law saying they were at fault for a war. To justify such a misreading of history, Belin cited several legal texts as Palestine and International Law by Henry Catton and Gerald von Gahn's Law Among Nations, which stress the illegal of Israel's presence in the administered territories. The rationalization for the declaration of aggression is that if Israel took the disputed territories illegally, it would have no right under international law in the future to resettle or retrieve them. Remember, these guys all operate by the law. There's reasons why they do things and set precedents for things. It's for something later in the future to happen based on that previous action, or to incite people. You pretend you're going to give away some land, and a lot of Israeli citizens will be getting an uproar. Just like in the United States, you pretend you're going to try to take away the guns, and you cause an uproar among all the gun owners and NRA and other people worried about the government overreach. Could it be intentional, trying to incite people? Seems very likely. American cooperation. The ongoing negotiations between Israel and the PLO are largely theatrics. Remember, this author is a pretty smart guy, publishing a magazine or newsletter called Israel Today. And his name, Barry Chamish, tells me a couple things about him. How many people are named Barry, and what organization or religion, nation do they usually belong to? That could be an assumption, but apparently he's a pretty smart journalist over in the Middle East. I believe that, smarter than me on these issues, and that's why I read all these books. So maybe I can kind of put two and two together. I might have to read a couple hundred books just to gain a little confidence of what I think is the correct thing that's going on, what's true and what's deception. I believe I've done that. And if you've been watching a lot of videos and doing research, then you have too. Simon Peres and the PLO's Abu Mazen, so the Israeli leader and the leaders of the Palestine Liberation Organization. It was submitted for Washington's approval. This is the Theatrics Peace Program. in September 1993, was upgraded in November and formally, though covertly, secretly, authorized by Secretary of State, USA, Warren Christopher, during his visit to Jerusalem in December. And when I started this video, it was pretty clear that the secret society, Masonic organizations are involved. And if we know anything about the Rothschilds and the banking system, the Illuminati are involved. And of course, they're connected with the Zionist organizations. The elites of the world who have been doing some very nefarious things behind the scenes for a very long time, according to my research, including bringing us revolutions in the 1800s, devastating revolutions, and revolutions in the 1900s, like the Russian Revolution in 1917 after World War I. The Americans promised to solve intractable problems, i.e. water. So apparently, Prime Minister Sharon of Israel said in a heated argument in his Congress in Israel, "Don't worry about the USA. We control the USA, and the Americans know it." I say that because of what I'm going to say next. So the Americans promised to solve intractable problems, i.e. water. So they control the USA, and they got our government agreeing to solve unresolvable problems like the water issue. Remember, it's a lot of desert there. Berlin gave away to the PLO the underground reservoir that supplies 30% of Israel's water needs. So again, I think there's trickery and deceit here. Why would Israel give away 30% of its water to the Palestinians while it's bombing and destroying everything? Listen to this next sentence. To compensate for the loss, America offered to build Israel 2 large desalination plants. This solution did nothing to save the anger of Israeli hydrologists who observed that desalinized water, could not be produced in the quantities needed to run industry and agriculture, and will increase the drinking water beyond the consumer's ability to pay. So there were some insurmountable problems here, and apparently the Americans' bank accounts, our tax dollars, was going to be footing the bill in piling up on top of the national debt. And of course, the Federal Reserve is not federal USA at all. It's private Illuminati, Rothschilds, private people-owned entity since 1913, which they did in secret over the Christmas holiday. And that's another whole story I've talked about. The prior 40 or 50 years, these international bankers had lost control over controlling the USA money supply. And presidents were poisoned and presidents were killed over that issue. So they do, in a way, control our country because the money controls our politicians. The political action committees, generally the largest ones and most powerful, are the Israeli, Zionist, Jewish ones. And these people do have agendas. Can anybody disagree with that? The propaganda is out there. New Age, New World Order, globalism, biodiversity, sustainability, going green, global warming, global cooling, terrorism, climate change, pole shifting, all kinds of threats, plagues. Keeping Shahs in line, next paragraph. Berlin is well aware of the flimsy nature of his government's coalition as he prepared his program. He realized that if the Shah's party, that was one of the Israeli parties, refused to support his plans, then they would fail. Since the constituency of Shahs is largely opposed to closer or any ties with the PLO, a party decision to oppose Labor's legislation was viewed as a likelihood unless steps were taken to keep members in line. So it's this big game of divide and conquer, having these opposing parties, like here in the USA we have the Republicans and the Democrats, or the issues of white lives matter versus black lives matter, straight people versus gay people, religion versus anti-religion, Americans against Mexicans, Americans against the Middle Easterners. They create these issues, men against women, young against old, poor against rich. A lot of us are aware of this stuff. It just goes on and on and on. And who controls our reality? And what makes for great entertainment and sales of newspapers or viewers on the nightly news, but having these controversies and inciting people on both sides of the fence. Well, as I read on, it gets crazier. The method of ensuring control of these different parties was organized blackmail. That's what it says here on page 52 on the top. Organized blackmail. After an extensive investigation, and with the cooperation of the United States Justice Department and the FBI, Israeli government investigators managed to trace some $600,000 of Shah's leader Ariel Deri's embezzled funds to drug money laundering operations in the U.S. and Belgium. Wasn't that nice? The high-level Israeli leadership are laundering drug money in the U.S. and Belgium. They're involved in the drug trade. The Justice Ministry and the Police Ministry kept these crimes out of the Deri's indictments. So long as this Shah's Israeli leadership, Ariel Deri and his group, do what they're told, they won't be indicted. So how good is that for world affairs? In the event that Shah chooses to throw Deri to the legal dogs, someday the Justice Department has prepared indictments against the sons of party spiritual leader Rabbi Ovida Yossi. Strong cases have been prepared against each of them for embezzlement in the $50 to $100,000 range. So even if the Shah's party wants to abandon Deri, the drug dealer, there's some indictments waiting for these other leaders from $50 to $100,000 price range, and apparently includes the USA Justice Department being involved in this sort of blackmail. At the time it was concocted, the thorn in the Shah's blackmail strategy was Attorney General Yosef Harish. He was replaced in the late fall of 1993 with a more complete politico, Mika Ben-Yah, another Israeli. Since taking up his new post, Ben-Yah has covered up the crimes of the Shahs. So these political parties cover up for each other. And it seems like after President Donald Trump got elected in the USA, all the things he said prior to the election, he abandoned those positions and has been covering up the crimes of the Hillary Clinton political campaign and the Democrats' political party. And the opposite is true, too. If the Democrats would have won, they would cover up the crimes of the Republican political party. They're all controlled by the same puppet masters. Apparently, high-level Illuminati, Freemasonic, occult, Zionist, Illuminati, bankster, elite, wealthy people organizations, CEOs, huge corporations, all worrying and concerned about protecting their interest. Multi-billion-dollar corporations don't want to fall. So the people will usually take the rap, be taxed to death, to pay and foot the bill. He has nothing holding them in escrow. He has been holding them in escrow until the day the Shahs threatened to stop supporting the current peace process. So what's it look like to hear about this inside political wrangling? The campaign against the settlers and their supporters. Listen up to this information and think about it. If this is going on in Israel, of course it's going on in Europe and the United States and other parts of the world. It looks like to be a normal modus operandi of these folks. The Berlin Party calls for the removal of all Jews from beyond the Green Line. Before such a change can be implemented, opposition from the settlers of the administered territories is to be eliminated. So they want to move people back across a certain line from settling, and the settlers that are living there will obviously oppose this, so the opposition has to be eliminated. Berlin is well aware that tens of thousands of Jewish territorial residents will fight his program and that they will have broad support throughout the country. Thus, if they are to be removed, he has decided it will have to be in stages. Now think about what they're doing in the USA, destroying our economic system and political system, social system. They're doing it in stages. Stage 1 calls for the disarming of the settlers. I talk a lot and my mouth gets dry. So stage 1 calls for the disarming of the settlers. So in the United States, we can see there are terror events created, or events that happen because of some lunatic, are used by the politicians to create the issue of disarming the Americans. And they have a reason for that, like they have a reason here. And the process has already begun in earnest. Since last December, hundreds of guns have been confiscated from the settlers, while notifications of license cancellations have been sent to many others. Once the settlers become less able to defend themselves, listen up to this. Army presence on the roads leading to their homes will be greatly diminished. So once they disarm the settlers, they're going to pull the army out, leading to heavy terrorist casualties, along with feelings of fear and helplessness. Now that's what they're doing all over the world. This will cause... Oops, was just interrupted. Back to the book. This will cause the more passive residents to panic, sell their homes, and flee. Now think about all this stuff with rising oceans, poles shifting, terror events, economic destruction. Economic destruction, people are leaving the cities, building bunkers or finding remote places in the mountains to live. Rising oceans, people are leaving the coastlines. Somebody's doing this intentionally. And here, this will cause the more passive residents to panic, sell their homes, and flee. So it's just a matter of statistical data. They've calculated why they use this fear-mongering, this propaganda. With the resulting crash in housing prices, the government will offer to buy up the homes of all the settlers wishing to move at current market value. Thus, the settlers can be evacuated without paying the high cost incurred when the government gave up the cyanide in 1979. So look at the directed energy weapons they say used in the California fires. Weather controls with hurricanes in Texas and Florida. Don't you think there's a plan why they're doing what they're doing? Dumping chemicals in the sky, HARP transmitters strategically located all over the world, gigantic microwave and sonic beam transmitters. Gwen Towers, GWEN, look them up. Bringing the 5G microwave transmission system online. with big, thick, powerful cables that stick around. A lot of wattage and amperage there. A lot of power there. Microwave energy. What do you think they can do? What have they already done? 9/11, World War I, World War II, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, all kinds of countries bankrupt intentionally. Go see my video on John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. What series number was that? Number 7, I think. Back to the book. Saying when you read enough of this stuff, you start getting a little idea what's going on. The Kaffa visits Hebron. So like I said, this stuff I just mentioned here is happening in the USA now with all this fear propaganda and activities, allowing or creating terror events, etc., fires. You know, that stuff dumped out of planes apparently is aluminum, barium, and strontium, and other heavy metals. When it lands on the ground or in the forest elsewhere, it is an accelerant to fire. It's like throwing gas into the woods before you throw a match. It's going to burst in flames. Why would they do that? Why would a lot of evergreen trees be dying? Other trees dying? Bugs, bees, birds, animals, fish dying. It's like whatever is going to happen on Earth, somebody wants to eliminate the survival food and water and everything else. They don't want us to survive. So it seems. Clearly, thousands of residents committed to staying in their homes will see through the plan and resist it. Belin's program calls for the instilling increased fear in the rebels. This will require a great deal of intelligence material to counteract their resistance. To facilitate this need, Belin requested and received a significant extension of Army intelligence, Amen, in order to supply the General Security Services, Shebek, with information required for total suppression of the opposition voices. Total suppression of the opposition voices. And remember, the USA is sending our leading police chiefs and sheriffs and other high people in government security apparatuses to Israel for training on how to come back here to the United States and police us like they police the so-called Palestinian terrorists, Arab terrorists all over the Middle East. It gets much worse as I read on here. New surveillance equipment installed at Belin's suggestion monitors all international phone and fax communications. The equipment is programmed to do real-time scanning for keywords, which when spoken or written, automatically switch on recording equipment. On a more personal level, the entire phone system of Hebron has been taped, while hundreds of individuals living elsewhere are being listened to also. So this is happening in Israel. What do you think is going on in the rest of the world? It seems like this and more. Amman has expanded its database of potential opposition activists to include detailed cross-checks, while the Shebek has infiltrated the settlements with dozens of spies. All this is happening in the U.S., in my opinion. If you doubt it, go buy this book and see about these journalists, well-known people, smarter people than me, writing about what's going on there. Read your newspaper, watch the news, see that it's going on all over the world. Dehumanizing the settlers. That's what it says here, highlighted. In order to take his program to its extremes, Belin has to take precautions so that violence against settlers would not provoke a sympathetic reaction from other Israelis, which would be translated into opposition to the peace process as he created it. And remember, these people are deceivers. What they call a peace process or a facade, a picture of what they say they're doing, may not be what they're really doing. Usually isn't. Dehumanizing the settlers required first delegitimizing them, legitimizing them, some words just don't come out right for me. This was to be accomplished with a media campaign aimed at painting the residents of the territories as fanatics. Can you see that happening here in the USA? Probably all over Europe, whether it's Greece, Germany, France. Once such an image has been planted, the settlers would no longer be identified by most Israelis as one of them. Think about the White Lives Matter demonstration. Turned into a KKK demonstration versus the Black Lives Matter, assisted with the Women's March demonstrations, and the march on the fence between the USA and Mexico, and so many more. It's all planned for a reason. Some kind of mind control, messing with our minds, our thinking. The truth is not there. It would then be easier to have a small number killed to break the morale of the rest of them. Page 54. To finance an expensive state-of-the-art public relations campaign, Beiland turned to Perez, the leader of Israel, who solicited the necessary startup funds, some $6.5 million, from French millionaire and close friend Jean Friedman. So he's got apparently a Jewish millionaire in France. The president can call on for some money to even kill a small number of these resistors to break the morale of the rest of them. If I wasn't reading this, I wouldn't believe it. A few extraditions for the cause. Beiland's plan calls for the government to consider drafting a law which will permit the extradition of Jews to Palestine for crimes against Palestine. So they're going to take some Jewish people who they say committed crimes against Palestine, move them out of the Jewish Israel territory into the rural area where the so-called Palestinian terrorists are living. There they would be subject to Palestinian criminal law. Beiland believes that Jewish retaliatory actions will be stopped cold if the perpetrators are sent to the Palestinian entity for trial and possible execution. Knowing what I know, I don't think that would happen at all. Never, anywhere, have the Jewish people not defended each other to the extreme, even the well-known guilty. Of course, I've only included about 200 books of my research in the last 4 years and 600 hours on YouTube, and almost 10 years before that reading books. And it's all indicated that throughout history, even the Encyclopedia Judaica, if they were caught red-handed, they were defended. Which that is something in common with the Freemasonic organizations. They are swear an oath to protect their own either. So you can say they have something in common with the Jewish organizations, the Masonic organizations, in that right. No matter what they do, they protect each other. Are these settlers paranoid? Many settlers and their supporters believe they are victims of a planned program of executions. Again, I mentioned Europe and the USA and the rest of the world. Some contend that their government was behind an initiative to destroy the settler movement by eliminating its most determined proponents. Their fear was fueled by the coincidental nature of terrorist attacks just previous to a massacre. And now they're trying to ridicule and demonize people who don't want to go along with the global warming agenda here in the USA and the world. Crazy. This book just gives you a glimpse into the mindset of these elitists who rule our world. And you can't even believe what they're saying. It's all meant for some kind of opposition or reaction so they can accomplish some kind of goal, the Hegelian dialectic. And they use divide and conquer. So the third party sits back while it watches the other two parties kill each other, and the third party organized it and caused it in the first place. In the first attack in Kayet Abba, 2 members of the Lupid family, a father and a son, were shot dead in their van by passing gunmen. So it said above here they would kill some of their own to get the effect to happen. His widow, Miriam, is number 4 on the right-wing Mollet party list. The next attack was failed attempt on the life of David Axelrod, spokesman for the Kehane China movement. The third attack was an ambush on the former member of the Kisnet, one of the Israeli parties, for the opposition National Religious Party, Haim Drunkman. With so many potential victims, the advocate of the execution theory contend the attacks have been orchestrated. And in my opinion, is there really any doubt? Look what's going on, like I said, in the USA. So the news of the robberies of Professor Yuri Milstein's home and office convinced the editors of the Israel Inside newsletter, the author of this book, that this was a man they had met, who gave them the secret documents earlier in this video. Milstein was most verbose about the cover-up of Rabin's incompetent military career, but refused to believe that past Rabin's very incompetence was being directed by forces in America and London. So intentional incompetence, consider that. Directed by forces in America and London, these would be the high-level Freemasonic, Illuminati, Zionist, Communist, bankster elites, secret societies controlling our world. Would they be bringing about intentionally having President Donald Trump to be acting incompetent intentional? Would that just be his job in all of this deception? However, after some thought, Milstein did not impart information that backed the editor's thesis. He said that in 1977, Jimmy Carter forced Menachem Begin, an Israeli leader, to appoint Moshe Dayan, his foreign minister. Dayan, whose deliberate inaction led to the debacle of the Yom Kippur War, was considered finished in politics, but was ordered revived by Carter's advisors in the State Department. Later, it was Dayan who persuaded Begin to accept far-reaching concessions at Camp David, Maryland, USA. So the guy's inaction led to a war, so I suppose they actually wanted the war and they needed a scapegoat. And after he was blamed for it, his career was revived. He was brought back into the circle, as they usually do. Okay, Rabin's robbers. This is the leader of Israel, Rabin. On 2 occasions in January, intruders attempted to steal the file of Yitzhak Rabin, collected by historian Dr. Yuri Milstein. The first attempt to break into his home failed when the criminals were detected. So somebody obviously hired them for espionage. It's political and governmental. What criminal steals documents? The second attempt a day later at Milstein's office was more successful. Although they did not abscond with any documents, the intruders were able to destroy a significant amount of material Dr. Milstein calls essential before their mission was interrupted unexpectedly by his assistant, Aurelia Yakov. Milstein and Yakov filed police complaints, not just for the break-in, but for the suspected illegal surveillance by the Shabak and other security agents in Israel. The book Milstein is currently working is called The Rabin File. So he's going to write a book about one of the Israeli leaders. Reminds me of Richard Nixon. If it is anything like his previous work, The History of the Israeli War of Independence, then the Prime Minister has cause for concern. So a lot of these things going on in the world are all secret. They're doing things in devious ways, deception. And look at the results all the time. It's not good. So what they're doing is not good. And then they want a world control when they're causing all these problems with nations all over the world. Can you imagine if they actually did control the whole world? And I'm sure all opposition would be eliminated automatically with high technologies, probably electromagnetically targeting a beam at you or I, or if we were microchipped, just turning us off, or sending an assassin, or so many other ways. With those microwave transmitters, sure they have many, 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 many ways. This future that seems looming ahead of us does not sound like it's going to be good. Milstein claimed that Rabin was a major example of a military commander whose failures by mutual agreement within the elite were swept under the rug. This book here is verifying everything I've been saying. He failed more than any other commander in 1948 in each of his posts. Among Rabin's failures reported in the book is his conduct as the head of operations of the Polmach Infantry Brigade. As the officer responsible for keeping the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem corridor open. So those are the two major towns in Israel today, two major towns. Jerusalem, which is supposed to be the spiritual center for the world, and Tel Aviv, which might be the financial control center of the world. So they had to keep that corridor open. He was utterly unsuccessful. The road was never secured, and hundreds died in ambushes. On March 24th, 1948, Rabin was stripped of his command, but mysteriously, 3 weeks later, was appointed commander of the Harry Brigade. So I suppose his actions were that he was only following orders, allowing all those people on that corridor to be ambushed and killed. On April 20, Rabin ran from the battlefield, leaving his soldiers trapped under Arab fire. 3 days later, while dozens of Harry fighters were dying in the battle at Nebi Samuel, Rabin was nowhere to be found. David Ben-Gurion, another Israeli leader, personally sought him out and found him asleep at army headquarters. This guy later on became a huge Israeli leader. On May 17th, Rabin was ousted from his post at the insistence of the Army High Command. as chief of staff of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, in 1967, Rabin suffered a nervous collapse 2 weeks before the outbreak of the Six-Day War and threatened to surrender before a shot was fired. When the war broke out, Rabin disappeared for the first few days. There was speculation that he had suffered another nervous breakdown, though his friends denied this, claiming he was only drunk. Dr. Millstone claims that these events are the tip of the iceberg, and his new work on Rabin will present the whole story. If it is ever published in anything like the form in which it is currently being written, today's Minister of Defense, Yaakov Rabin, will likely demand that the IDF censorship office take a long, hard look at the book, as it did 2 years ago when author Meti Golin's revelations about the Kissinger-Rabin secret diplomacy following the Yom Kippur War were censored, and publication of the work was delayed for 18 months. All right, moving on. Chapter 4, page 57, May 1994. While few other journalists realized how important the issue was, the editors wrote about the growing discontent in the IDF over Rabin's peace deal. The IDF officers rebel. So the Israel Defense Forces officers rebel. Dozens of IDF officers signed a protest advertisement that appeared in the Israeli newspapers in March. The highest ranking signatory was Resident General Yamari Olmert. The public notice read, "The surrender to terror is the only achievement of the negotiations with the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which threaten our survival." So they never wanted to make a deal. Now they have the other opposition coming out, the military, saying any negotiations is a surrender to terror. Do you see how this can never go anywhere? It was never intended to go anywhere. It worked hundreds of years for Zionism to come about, to get that land, to create the state of Israel as per prophecy. And remember, there is a spiritual component to this. They do have a particular religion. It's not what you think it is. If you're not Jewish, you don't know what it is. But the encyclopedia says, historically, the Kabbalah has been one of their religious philosophies. And a lot of Kabbalists have been accused of sorcery. That would be witchcraft. So what do we know? I think we need to know, and that's why I go through a lot of trouble to investigate all this psychic aspect, remote viewing aspect, UFO and alien aspect, channeling material from entities on the other side aspect, all these rituals, sacrifices. There's something real about it. And when you have to understand the motives of certain people, why they do certain things. Shaking hands with terrorists means terror has won. Arafat represents his own interest and will never fight for the security of Israel. The IDF has experienced a wave of defections. Among the officers who have opposed the current peace process are Ron Shakar, Deputy Commander of the Hebron Reserve Brigade, Military Prosecutor Simon Bart, and Captain Clegg Ben Arsi. Shakar has announced publicly that if ordered to evacuate settlements, he will refuse the command. This is seriously complicated. This seriously complicates any government plan to remove Jewish residents from Hebron. Bart has refused to do his reserve duty as a military prosecutor, stating as his reason, no matter how serious the crime, the IDF is letting PLO criminals off. They are no longer using legal standards to try terrorists, but political ones. They can't participate in court that met out public service sentences to firebombers. So the Palestinians whose land has been stolen and is continually being stolen, if they try to stop it or defend it themselves, they're called criminals. Just like in the rest of the world, if you're not agreeing to the government position on anything, global warming, whatever, evacuating the countryside and moving into the cities and living like a sardine with all kinds of monitoring and surveillance and even microchipping people and poisoning people with toxins and other craziness, well, they might call you an anti-government belligerent if you don't surrender your weapons and maybe approve of homosexuality and transgenderism. It's funny what they can make people think. But they've been studying mind control for a long time. Ben Artsy refuses to do reserve duty until the government agrees to a national referendum on the peace process. So they call it a peace process. To me, it's anything but a peace process. They have to have the two parties pretending to be in opposition, like the Republicans and Democrats in the USA. And I'm sure they do it in every country. Even in Britain, London, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Austria. His claim to fame is being a Likud leader, Benjamin Netanyahu's brother-in-law. So this guy is Benjamin Netanyahu's brother-in-law. Please go look up Benjamin Netanyahu and the keywords Finks Bar. Finksbar. He said something to a group of people and somebody tape recorded it. Benjamin Netanyahu Finksbar. And you'll know what Benjamin Netanyahu thinks. And this is Benjamin Netanyahu's brother-in-law. Netanyahu does not advocate a refusal of service as a protest. Ben Artsy's stand has driven a wedge between them. Nonetheless, with so many IDF officers openly refusing to follow orders, the government will have a problem keeping a tight lid on what appears to be the spreading mutiny among the military commanders. All right, moving on to another highlighted paragraph. Getting more involved in Angola. 4 Israeli secret security experts, including Reserve General Yosef Bar-On, were expelled from Angola on March. Bar-On was the owner of the Luda-based security firm, Angosigo, which was involved in guarding the country's oil installations against terrorism and training elite forces fighting the rebel junta movement. So the junta movement rebels in Angola were being fought off by elite Israeli troops. Since when did the Israelis become the police force of the world? You're going to find out. That's the plan. According to Angolan Foreign Ministry, Bar-On used his armed men. So here's this security force in Angola, supposedly protecting the country's oil installations against terrorism. And again, it's against the local natives who are being destroyed, citizens trying to protect themselves. That's what you call a terrorist. Now you bring in Israeli forces to protect your assets, oil assets. But look what these security forces do. According to the Angolan Foreign Ministry, Bar-On used his armed men to stage a number of major heists against the country's diamond industry. Despite the expulsions Angola wishes to continue its military ties with Israel, which include the purchase of sundry avionic equipment from Israel's aircraft industries. Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Beilin wishes to expand Israeli ties in Angola. Beilin has persuaded the Defense Ministry to permit IDF, Israeli Defense Forces soldiers, to join in the UN peacekeeping force, which will patrol the country once the ceasefire between the government and UNITA is reached. After receiving government approval, Beilin submitted his proposal to Boutros Ghali, the United Nations Secretary General. If the United Nations accepts his offer, this will be the first time the IDF has officially served on behalf of another country. But it will be the second time that the Beilin has approved sending Israelis to an African war zone. In April of last year, Beilin uses foreign ministry funds to set up a field hospital in Somalia. In his book 40 Plus, Beilin elaborated on his program to turn the IDF into a force to safeguard peace agreements throughout the world. It appears he is taking the first steps to turn his vision into a reality. The reader should realize that the following reports preceded government activity by months and media recognition of the issues, sometimes by years. In May 1994, Inside Israel, these people who published this book, their magazine, Inside Israel, reported that the issue of water was irretractable. In November, the government found a solution. It simply gave away 10% of the country's supply to Jordan as part of its peace treaty. In the same issue, Inside Israel accurately supplied readers with the precise details of Rabin Golan's withdrawal plan, a secret he was withholding from the public. Notable also was the exposure of the PLO's, Palestine Liberation Organization, illegal activities at Orient House months before the abuses became a national issue. Finally, most ominously, the editors collected evidence. The editors collected evidence that sophisticated mind control techniques were being used against Israeli youth with disastrous consequences. Finally, the editors collected evidence that sophisticated mind control techniques were being used against Israeli youth with disastrous consequences. So do you suppose they're using mind control techniques in the US, Europe, and the rest of the world? That was page 62. So I'm going to stop there on this book, but I'm going to go back and now read what I first read when I started this video. Just a short paragraph to finish this video. All right, Netanyahu applauds Rabin for his skillful use of disinformation aimed at promulgating falsified history of the negotiations and obfuscating his early role in them. His target is Perez for rewriting history by fraudulently placing himself in the center of it. So that's what politicians do. They seize the moment. Don't let any crisis go to waste. Okay, now I'm going to read what I was talking about. In June 1994 was the first time Inside Israel, the investigative magazine, author of this book, associated with this book, spoke about Masonic manipulation of the peace process. So the secret societies, the Freemasons, the Masonic manipulation of the peace process. In May, two newspapers, Sashi and Yodet Aeronaut, published pieces documented Rabin's ties to the secret society. They could not be ignored. Brothers in robes, Prime Minister Yaakov Rabin and Jordanian King Hussein have more in common than that they are both Middle East leaders. Both are members of the Freemasons. Hassan is open about his association with the Masons and has achieved a high degree of standing in the organization. He flies several times a year to attend Masonic functions in London. Well, isn't that nice to know that leaders all around the world are flying to London a couple times a year, several times a year, to attend Masonic functions? And people don't want to believe these secret societies are controlling events behind the scenes for the new age, new world order, globalization, and they'll do anything they have to do to bring it about, including, as it says in this material, killing some citizens and blaming it on these people, creating fear. Some people will flee. These people in control of our world are very smart. Make no mistake about that. A response from the Prime Minister's office on his ties to Masonry reads, after Mr. Rabin completed his army career, just before becoming an ambassador to Washington, he was inducted into the Freemasonic movement. That was 26 years ago, and since then he has maintained no further ties to Masonry. That's what they said. But Rabin's denial is belied by a film of him presiding over a Masonic celebration in Jerusalem in 1976. A Masonic celebration in Jerusalem in 1976. Jerusalem is uniquely important to Masons since they trace their origin to the Masons who built Solomon's temple. So we say we can tie the high leadership, according to what I've been reading in this book, on this video, the high-level Vatican folks, making a deal with the Israeli government, and the Vatican plans on building on Mount Zion. We can tie that in with the Freemasons. We can tie that in with all these terror events, killing people, trying to get certain things done or make people believe things. Tie that with London, even in the USA, the Freemasonic, Skull and Bone organizations, Illuminati, banksters. They have a plan, and it involves King Solomon's temple, which is part of the occult mysticism in the Kabbalah. Egyptian hieroglyphics, Isis, Osiris, Horus, the all-seeing eye on the US $1 bill. The obelisk all over the United States and the world in our downtown city squares, which is a phallic unit for Isis, the sun god religion. Though one is a proud member and the other coy about his membership, it is not known if Rabin and Hussein view the future of Jerusalem in shared Masonic terms. I've gone over enough books and material, even on the Jesuits, the Vatican, all these groups. They're all connected. And it's so broad of a spectrum, it just boggles people's mind and they can't see it. And I can understand that. Last piece I'm going to read here, and probably the most interesting, astounding, unbelievable. Page 61. By the spring of 1994, the editors also began to realize that one of Yossi Beilein's duties was to meld the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, into a world army. He approached the task with vigor, sending Israeli troops to trouble spots far from the Middle East. Remember, I've gone over in my previous videos, the USA has been sending States and towns have been sending their leaders to Israel for training on how to police we the people in the fashion they police all the terrorists in the Middle East. And the terrorists, of course, the people who are being killed, trying to resist being killed and having their land taken. Hence, they're terrorists. It's amazing. You know, you pick up a book like this. I got 1,000 books in my office, gone over a couple hundred of them, and you start reading this stuff and you go, oh my. Can't even believe I had this material in this book, and I've got so many others. So thank you for watching my video, Rick Miracle Reporting.